Welcome back to Between Two Bots. I'm your co-host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI-first system of intelligence for HR and IT employee service. I am, of course, joined by Dr. Mark van Rijmenam, author, futurist, and entrepreneur. This is the podcast where we discuss the future of humanity, society, and government as seen through the lens of your data, your privacy, and the ethics of AI. Every week, we're redefining the boundaries between AI, ethics, data, and ways that we as humans coexist with machines. Listen each week to learn from experts who are on the front lines defining how we'll work and live for decades ahead. If you enjoy these discussions, and we hope you do, please like, share, and comment in your favorite podcast app. Today, we get to learn about hot topics in AI ethics from one of the foremost authorities in the space, as we all reconcile what it means to be human in an era of automation. We really need to get more comfortable exploring where it's okay for humans and machines to, say, intersect. Who wins when there's a disagreement? Who's responsible when machines make bad decisions? These conversations will define our generation. Dr. Mark, do you want to go ahead and introduce today's guest?
Yes, today's guest, I'm very excited to have today's guest, and we are literally covering the entire globe today. So from Silicon Valley to Australia to Zurich, where we have Dorothea Baur present and joining us from Zurich. Dorothea is an independent consultant who provides ethics strategy consulting for decision makers in tech and finance. And she's at the intersection of technology, society, the environment, and companies. And these are often, where the ethical questions arise. So Dorothea is the perfect guest for our show today. And I'm very excited to have you here today, Dorothea.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Fantastic. So as the frequent listeners should know by now, we have a standard format where we cover the first 10 minutes of the show. We discuss 3 articles that we have come across in the news that we think are interesting and newsworthy to discuss with our guest. And today is no different. We found 3, I think, very interesting articles. And the first article is how big tech dominates the EU's AI ethics group. And that, of course, is a very important topic to discuss because the author, how he describes the article, is that big tech has a very big influence in the EU regulations and creating the important regulations that are appearing in the EU. In 2018, the European Commission set up a high-level expert group that would advise the EU on ethical guidelines, and almost half of the group was produced or came from big tech, and only 6 people of the group represent civil society, and that, of course, asks the question, is that a good thing or not? And the author talks about Luciano Floridi, a well-known ethics and artificial intelligence professor who has also ties with this big tech, and he's even been tweeted about himself as the Google philosopher. So it's sort of a common thread when we create regulations for big tech, that big tech is part of these committees advising those regulations. So how big a problem is that, Dorothea?
Well, it certainly is a problem in an industry which is kind of dominated by an oligopoly, and all these players from the oligopoly are involved. So that's, of course, unfortunate circumstance. But beyond the mere, numerical question, like how many big tech representatives were there, how many civil society representatives were there, it's just a basic question whether you want to engage with big tech or do you want to contain it? And I studied political science or international relations when the Cold War just had ended a long time ago. And in hindsight, when we studied political history, it was always like the Cold War was between, containment or engagement. The US would do containment or engagement strategy with the USSR. And I just have this distinction in my mind because some people, they treat big tech like an enemy that should be contained. and the others very readily engage with big tech. And this also comes across quite clearly in this article. Like some are very happy to embrace and to accept funding, also academics that are mentioned in the article, and others are not. And what I like most about this article is, of course, it raises a critical issue because we don't want to have our policy dictated by big tech, but we want to, I would say, we want to have big tech included on the table rather than doing all of their lobbying behind closed doors. You know, if this is like, if there was a choice between the two, I'd rather have them on the table than know that they spent millions on lobbying, of which we don't know anything. So, but in the article, it also says, like, some person says, it's not black or white. And money, how does she say it? Another guy says, money doesn't change your opinion, but it creates a self-selection, meaning that some people will still attend, an expert roundtable, also, researchers, when there is funding from big tech involved. Others will stay away because they're too critical. But I think it's good to go there, even if big tech is there, and even if you're critical of big tech. I think it's your exact responsibility to go there and not kind of abstain from your responsibility. You have a responsibility to also engage with big tech when you're in that field.
I completely agree. I thought the author was editorializing a little bit too much. I think, to your point, there's no such thing as keeping big tech on the sidelines. We'd rather them engage actively in the dialogue, because if not, they're going to engage, or they'll be actively engaged, but outside of the
Exactly.
dialogue.
Exactly. No, it's also this anti-big tech stance sometimes goes as far as to criticize brave people that work within big tech and that are doing AI ethics within big tech, which is now, aside from the expert group of the EU, more on a corporate level. So they engage on AI ethics in big tech, and they're being discredited by other voices saying, like, you're being co-opted. You can't be taken seriously as an AI ethicist. But I mean, we need to be able to integrate ethics into big tech. And of course, it also needs to be assessed from the outside. And there is a division of labor. And I imagine this landscape to be something like in AI ethics, something like we have in sustainability, where you have like World Wildlife Fund, who cooperate with any company they can find. Then you have Greenpeace, who are a bit more critical, and then you have Extinction Rebellion, who you will never find on a table because they're outside on the street, chaining themselves to traffic lights, and so we need different stances of criticism. But we also need some people who are willing to talk to the big influential players, and because what big tech says in those consultations at least gets publicly heard, and they can be held accountable for what they say in those contexts. So I found the article was a bit too, yeah, one-sided in my opinion.
The second article that we're going to discuss, I'd say, is more news and less editorial, uh, but also a topic that's timely and important. With robotics for EU, the EU wants to believe that there's a way to use AI responsibly with respect to robots. There was a €3 million project funded by the European Commission to explore these topics, really just to establish a bunch of workshops to start the dialogue around what's the appropriate use of robots, and specifically AI-driven robots. One question I think is worth unpacking on this show is robots used in conjunction with AI, where the outcome or how the robots do their work is not deterministic, versus automation that is applied in things like factories, where robots are used to do things that are either usually dull, dirty, or dangerous, but don't necessarily involve AI. What's your perspective on this dialogue that the European Commission has kicked off?
Well, I find it very important, but again, I need to kind of criticize the journalist, because what I don't like about the article is its very title. I mean, what's that? With robotics for EU, the EU wants us to believe in responsible AI robots. What's that? It's so suggestive. As if they were trying to manipulate us. I mean, that's a political actor. Of course, they do have a plan, they have a strategy. Luckily, they have. But why would they manipulate us and believe in what's that? That's not something metaphysical. In my opinion, a correct wording would be with robotics for EU. The EU wants to raise awareness for the importance of responsible robotics, which is not as sexy, of course, and will not generate as many clicks. But I mean that would be a fair way of expressing what is effectively described in this article. And I like the initiative because awareness for AI in general, let alone AI ethics, is quite low still from what I know. For example, in Switzerland, they tried to conduct a study and they wanted to find people who had been affected, probably negatively, by automated decision making, not by robots, but by automated decision making, some form of AI, encounter. And they couldn't find anyone because people are not even aware of where AI is used and how it affects them. It's not like in the US where you have much more debate about these issues. But so I think awareness raising and also responsible robotics is really important because it, in my opinion, should address us in our role as users, consumers, citizens, investors, employees, employers, whoever. So in all of our roles, we need to be prepared for a future where we will encounter more robotics. And it's really important that each of us in all our roles kind of take on responsibility and have some kind of awareness of like ethical guidelines when using these robots, or how they could have been developed.
Well, I think the third article goes a bit more deeper into the challenge that we have with AI, and it's an article that's very topic that's very dear to me because I've been working on this area for a couple of years, and the title of the article is "Machine Learning, Deepfakes, and the Threat of AI: An AI Hate Bot." And of course, this goes into the big problem that we have around fake news, and that with the advanced tools that have come to the market now, such as GPT-3, but most likely GPT-4, 5, and 6 coming in the years to come, automated fake news production is a thing. Automated news production has been a thing for quite a few years now, but we also see now automated fake news production, and I think that's seriously problematic. And the author describes some examples of what could happen, and one of the examples is that, for example, China would invade Taiwan, and then would spin up a fake news story in the US, either showing that nothing is happening at all, or showing that it's the other way around, or and then even have live agents in the US confirming the story. So that really confusing people and creating problems within society. And we've seen, of course, the problems of that fake news arises due to fake news already happening with the elections in the US, with Brexit, etc. So with deepfakes becoming more realistic, we can then, of course, start to use AI again to counter fake news AI. But how should we approach this problem? Because I think it's a big problem, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that one I found the hardest article among the three that you sent me because, I mean, what can we do? It's already bad enough as it is. We don't need perfect deepfakes to make people believe like anything that appears on Facebook or wherever, they hang out. So can it be any worse? Yes, of course it can. Apparently, the author has a vivid fantasy for dystopian scenarios, and thanks for sharing them with us. It doesn't make my sleep any better, but I'm not sure whether this like fighting fire with fire approach, like this total weaponization, maybe that's the idealistic ethicist inside me that kind of revolts against this approach. I don't know whether that's the correct one because who benefits from these methods getting better? It's not clear that in the end, the good AI, the deepfake fighting AI, will win. So I struggled a bit. I just found the very end of the article particularly challenging or like problematic, where he had a very negative view of companies, where he says basically big tech what did they say? Big tech, the real danger is that one of the companies would find out that there is no natural limit to the level of anger and division that can be monetized through artificially intelligent means. Sadly, it's a hypothesis that most of us have done little to discourage. So again, it's this view that companies will will want to do, and will be able to do anything they want for the mere sake of profit. And this one dimensional notion of companies as like single minded profit maximization machines is just so 20th century. Because we are talking about stakeholder capitalism. We're having a climate crisis where it becomes very clear that this one-dimensional shareholder value thinking does not really hold up to public scrutiny, or cannot really solve our problems anymore. And this trend will also affect big tech, and also affect those companies. So they can't be purely monetarily driven, and be willing to basically divide societies across the globe, and incite civil war just for the sake of money, because even it will not pay off, because their employees will walk out. We see that in Silicon Valley already. The most critical force among the stakeholders of big tech are their own employees. So I don't
But of
see
course,
that
if
coming.
if it's a state, then it's a different story, obviously.
Yeah, that's a different note. But that's the way he wrote about big tech. But of course, if this really becomes the new geopolitics, then we are really doomed, basically. And we already see some of that in other parts of the world. Or yeah, so then that's not about stakeholder capitalism anymore. That's a wholly different problem.
Yeah, but I love that you took it out of the dystopian realm. James Miller, I think he was focused on this notion of the GANs competing, and
Yes.
this downward spiral. It's quite intimidating, and yet, to your point, whether it's a state actor or a private enterprise, if we assume the best, that they do have the best interests of humans at heart, we have to assume that it's unlikely to happen. Now,
Yes.
shifting into the next section of the discussion, we're going to ask you some questions. And as an ethicist, one of the things that we'd love to get your perspective on is the topic of AI ethics. Really is a bit of a misnomer, I think, because really we're talking about humans applying their own ethics in kind of AI space. And so if we think about the fact that we have control over what these machines can do, I think it leads us away from some of the dystopian kind of visions of that article. In your words, is AI dangerous? And to the extent it is, how do you reconcile the AI being dangerous with the humans being dangerous?
No, I mean, I would not call AI dangerous. I mean, I would say humans are dangerous, or can be dangerous. And in the end, it's always our own responsibility to, you know, control what we are creating. And everything, like ethics, can be defined as everything that humans can impact, and that could be different if we behave differently. So for example, earthquakes cannot be the subject of ethics, because they're not caused and affected by human behavior. But everything that is set in motion by humans is part of our responsibility. And of course, AI, whether it is dangerous, it's often whether you have preference for using words such as agency for AI, or whether you're saying no, cannot even talk about bad AI, because AI is neutral. And I don't want to engage too much in those terminological games. I just want to emphasize that from an ethical point of view, it is our responsibility to make inventions, and to move on with progress into a direction that is good for humanity.
So if we can just, for the fun of it, just go on to an academic level, because it doesn't happen
Oh,
very
yes.
often that there are two talk doctors on the show. So
Oh.
we should make use of that.
Putting me under pressure. It's 10 p.m. here. I left my doctor title at 8 p.m.
Well, it's 8 a.m. at my time, so I'm still waking up. So we're equal there.
Okay.
No, but as part of my PhD a couple of years ago that I did research on a theory called sociomateriality, which sort of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the theory sort of discusses in how the social, being humans, and the material, how they interact with each other, and how they influence each other as well, because the material, being technology, is being created with a certain intention, but then the social might use it in a different intention than was planned, and that can have all kinds of effect for the organization. So within my dissertation, I argued that we should not only have the social and the material, we should also have the artificial, because the artificial is not part of the material, because it's a different breed altogether. Yes, it's technology, so you could argue that it is part of the material, but because of it has intelligence, which is not human intelligence, we should have a separate category for that. And then if you have that, you have then the social, the material, and the artificial interacting with each other within an organization. Of course, this is very theoretical, and but I thought for me that was a very interesting. I liked that approach to look at artificial and how artificial or how AI is influencing organizations. Um, from your perspective and from your research, how should organizations deal with artificial intelligence to ensure that we use it in the way that it was originally intended to use, and then we assume that it was intended with it had good intentions by the humans who created it.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of adding just a new dimension or an extension of existing dimensions when we talk about the responsibility of corporations in a non-financial way. So just like they are responsible for their impacts on societies and the environment, etc. Now they're also of course responsible for the impacts they cause with the help of AI. And so what they need is kind of a structured approach for managing AI that also kind of like they now monitor their supply chains, or they monitor their emissions, whatever. They need some kind of structured way of addressing the risks and opportunities of AI. And I think it starts with, first of all, asking the question, what do we want to achieve with AI? Do we really need AI for the purpose we are striving to achieve? And then going on with like having some diversity in the team when you're creating AI. Make sure that different disciplines are represented, ethnicities, gender, of course. And then like the social aspects, but also the technical aspects, using all kinds of methods that are available for identifying bias in your data set, etc. But there needs to be some kind of a management system where there is and a strong governance of AI projects to make sure that you always have an eye on ethics, and ethics needs to be integrated across the whole life cycle of an AI project. But I don't think other than big tech, too many companies are there yet. At least not in continental Europe, from what I know.
So one of the central kind of ethical conundrums is data. Now we all want the benefits of AI, but nobody wants our personal data used for training or our personal data misused. And we all certainly have, I would say, a right to know how and when our data is being used. And yet, the tired old cliche really applies here. If you're not paying, you're the product. And curious to know how you wrestle with what's the responsible use of data when we've voluntarily given it to, whether it's big tech or anyone else, to be able to produce the outcomes that we want from AI.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we briefly. I mean, you sent me that question, and I thought about it, and I just thought, well, I mean, what does it mean to handle data responsibly for a company? I think for that matter, we have laws, we have GDPR, we have whatever law applies, and then I wanted to say that what's more important is how you inform your users about how you use their data. And of course, you can always be better than the law and position yourself as an extra privacy friendly company like Apple does, or like some other companies do. But more important than how you handle the data is that you make it clear you communicate it clearly to the users. And that's where the challenge lies, because no one is going to read privacy policies in legalese. And I like the new trend, or like some companies being much more creative in how they present your options as a user to you, and how you can, you know, allow your data to be, used by them. Or I also like the move from Apple to switch from default you're being tracked by an app to you're not being tracked by apps. Do you want to allow them to track you? And the impact that this had, like I think 80% of users now say they don't want to be tracked. So I'm more like interested in the front end, like when I as a user, interact with the company, what choices do they present to me in, and in what way do they present them to me? But of course, you assume we're giving away our data voluntarily. But even if we do give away them voluntarily, and no one, puts a gun on my head and says, "Give me your data," that of course never happens. But you give them away voluntarily, but you're still not aware what you're agreeing to in most cases. So that's why I really think that interface between companies and their users is where there's a lot of room also for creativity and innovation.
But there's also a responsibility for consumers. I completely agree with you that there's a responsibility for the companies to make it easily digestible, and to to adhere to whatever regulations in wherever country you are active. But then there's also we as consumers also have the responsibility to educate ourselves, to know what's being done. And what I find very interesting is at the moment you see the revelation with Facebook with Francis Hogan, and everyone is complaining about Facebook and how they are just privacy disaster and they steal our data, but at the same time they report record profits. So clearly nobody really cares. So I find it very interesting.
I know there's this attitude behavior gap, but that's like a well-known phenomenon. That's like everyone saying like, "Oh, I care about sustainability and I only buy sustainable products," and then you give them a T-shirt for $5 and they buy it anyway. And I think that's the same with Facebook. "Oh, I care about my privacy, but I want to be in touch with my friends." And of course there is also an individual responsibility, but you can only put individual responsibility on educated users. And education, of course, there's self-training. You have duty to inform yourself to a certain degree. But I think from now on, and that's also become very obvious in the pandemic, we need more data literacy in general. People need to be able to distinguish good sources from bad sources, serious news from fake news, etc., as long as it's still possible and the deepfakes are not too good. But so I think that in the future it will also a lot will depend on our educational systems, that they will have different tasks to fulfill, and to really make sure that children already learn how to deal with their own data responsibly. But of course, now we in our age, it's also our responsibility to keep up with the news within our abilities. Of course, we're probably not representative for the real average user, but I still think it also needs to be presented in an accessible and intelligible way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And but if we want to shift gear a little bit, and move from the corporate level or company level to the state level, and obviously we
Mm,
already briefly covered it in the third article,
mm,
where we talked about the fake news in China.
mm.
In China, of course, there's a different perspective to data, and yes, the Chinese government is very much focused on protecting of data from the corporates, that they can't and use and copy and steal all the consumer data. But at the same time, when it comes to the state level, they want all the data they can get their hands on. And at the same time, I think the Chinese society works a bit differently than the Western society, where privacy is less of an issue. It's more, privacy almost. I think even that there's not even a word in Mandarin for privacy. So they have a different perspective to that, and as a result, they have an unfathomable amount of data which they can use to train the AI, and as a consequence, they are very very far ahead in terms of AI. I think especially to Europe, but also to the US, and this is only going to increase with the EU getting more stricter guidelines on the use of
Mm.
AI. So we're going one way, and China's going the other way, and so what can Europe do to catch up with China?
I know, but I mean, do we really want to catch up with China? In what way? Because if we say China is a leader in AI, yeah, in terms of market shares of AI, companies, in terms of patents that have been approved. So, what is the metrics that we're using there, and that is, desirable for us, especially when we think that this leadership might have come at the expense of fundamental rights like privacy, and that this it's not possible that we're going this way. It's like being a leader for the sake of being a leader, and purely quantitatively measured. That's not where we want to go. And I think the EU has made this very clear. Even though I must say I'm Swiss, I'm not even part of the EU, but we're an island in the EU. So, but the EU has made it very clear in their proposed AI Act. They say we want to design something that's in line with fundamental European values. And I like this value-based approach to AI, because if we just develop technology for the sake of becoming a leader in terms of market share or monetization, whatever, and we develop something that we're not clear yet how it will impact people or societies, it will be irreversible. It will be very hard to revert the damages that have been created and the mistrust that has been sown, etc. So I'd rather go for the careful approach with the EU, which some claim will even help innovation because it will direct innovation into a different, direction than say yeah, as fast as possible. We need to grow for the sake of growing. But you can also call me naive. I'm quite open to criticism there.
So, Dorothea, you alluded to the EU's ethical or guidelines for how
Mhm.
to use AI, and often, certainly in the United States, and I believe this applies to the EU, we think about regulation as being almost like applying a brake on innovation.
Mm.
And maybe
Mm.
that's Silicon Valley centric view of the world, but do you think it's possible for the EU to apply these guidelines for how AI can be used while still, let's just say, not slowing down the pace of innovation?
Yeah, I think it is possible because the EU is so big, So there's a certain market power. It's not even if companies might say, "Oh, we're not going, we're going to avoid the EU as much as possible." They're not. It's not possible for them to avoid the EU. It's not like Switzerland where. After every direct democratic vote we have, or before every direct democratic vote, companies will say, we will leave Switzerland. If citizens accept this vote, this is anti-corporate, we will leave. And then they don't leave. They don't even leave Switzerland. So I don't think tech companies are going to avoid the EU because the EU can't be avoided. They're too big. So, but of course, in order to make regulation compatible with innovation, you need to present companies options with how to successfully act within your regime. So the guidelines, the legal guidelines that forbid certain things or that impose rules on how you develop and use AI kind of need to complement it with some incentives that, stimulus for how to, develop AI that goes into the direction that the EU envisions. So that's what I think is important. I think you say it's carrots and sticks, and so we only talk about the sticks now. We see the EU regulation, and that sounds stifling for some, but I think if it is complemented with some carrots, and that's really important, it can be a huge chance.
Just as a thought experiment, do you ever envision a time when the corporations could self-regulate because market forces require them to, when we don't need the hand of government intervening to provide these regulations?
No, I don't. I don't even want to think about that because I'm not that libertarian. Because I mean, what would that mean if corporations would self-regulate? That would mean that the market functions perfectly well and there is no external effects, etc. And this can only come about via regulation. I don't think we'll ever achieve that point. And also, I would feel kind of powerless as a citizen because I like shaping the regulation in my country, but of course I'm a bit spoiled. We have so much direct democracy, but still, no, I don't think we're going to go there, get there. It's not
Interesting
something that we
perspective.
can.
In the United
It,
States, we say
it
you vote with your wallet, and
Well, yeah, of course, you vote with your wallet, but we also vote with our ballot, and yeah, so different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, but then the question is, of course, do we really vote with our wallet? Because if we were just just coming back to what we discussed a bit earlier, with Facebook, we're not voting with our wallet, so it's a difficult
well,
topic.
I would argue that we do, right? Because the advertisers are not leaving Facebook in droves, despite the fact that Facebook has tarnished its own reputation. So the consumers that have chosen to stick with the Facebook platform feed the beast that is the advertisers, which is essentially consumers voting with their wallet.
Yeah, if you look at it from that perspective, that that the beast sort of continues to feed on itself almost. But the fact that a large group would also say or said that we don't want Facebook to control our data and ruin our privacy. Nothing, and at the same time, Facebook keeps on growing. So it's sort of it goes two ways, I think.
Ironically, I think the consumers, the Facebook users, would mutiny if the features that rely on their data were taken away, if the feed was less personalized, or if the ads were less targeted, or if your family members weren't tagged in your photos, all the things that, from an ethical perspective, we rail against. Those are the things that keep the platform sticky.
Well, that's what makes it so tricky, and that's why I also like that the EU addresses like dark patterns, etc., as like one of the second level risk level issues in their pyramid of risks. So it's like high level. So manipulating people and kind of making things attractive for them that are actually bad for them. That's something that they will want to screen, and I'm really curious how they're going to do that, because I mean, according to my observations, that would mean that 90% of all cookie banners would have to be redesigned already, but let alone all these tricks like tagging people to make you stay there, and then you reveal more than you might want to reveal about yourself by tagging others against their will, etc. So I think that's really interesting that the EU has addressed this dark pattern thing quite high up in their pyramid.
But I think it also immediately shows the challenges that come with either regulating or creating ethical AI. Especially if you think about it, that we as humans already have much difficulty to determine what is ethical and what's not ethical, and what is ethical for me might not be ethical for you. And then at the same time, ethics change over time as well. What was deemed perfectly fine 200 years ago is deemed not correct in today's world. And then with AI developing further and further, we need some form of machine ethics, ethical AI. Uh, how are we going to create ethical AI if we can't even agree as humans what ethics means to us? And what are some of the challenges that we face when doing that?
Well, I think it's an illusion to think that everything, or like all ethical questions, can be covered by hard law. Hard law can only be kind of set the guidelines and emphasize certain values that we all think are important, like some kind of privacy, some kind of human oversight, some kind of fairness or equality, and then of course what this means in detail arises through practicing oftentimes, and then the law also evolves. So uh, even if we have laws, we still need to keep that space for individual decision making, and that's why I like principle based laws and not like uh, all those like detailed standards, because you still need to leave it up to the responsibility of companies and users, etc., to also contribute their uh, share of into whole ethics debate, or how ethics is being practiced, because otherwise you suffocate people. You can't do that. if you regulate everything in detail.
Dorothea, this is a fascinating discussion. I wish we didn't have to get you off the hot seat so soon. It feels like we're just getting started. I'm thinking back to where we started the conversation with the very first article, and about how big tech is inherently going to participate in these conversations, and to pretend that we can box them out by not giving them a seat on the commissions, etc. That's the only thing that really seems naive. I think where you were going is definitely the right approach, where we should embrace them and solicit their opinion, and then perhaps rein them in with guidelines. Not sure who the guidelines should come from, but definitely rein them in with some guidelines. It would be great to maybe have you back another session to continue the discussion, because these are topics that are not going away anytime soon.
I'd be happy to. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Dorothea, for joining us at your late evening. You can now definitely relax and
Yes.
enjoy the rest of your evening. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, so thank you very much. And for those listeners who enjoyed this conversation, and also the other conversations that we have at Between Two Bots podcast, please like or subscribe or leave any comments. We'll reply to all of them. And we'll see you on the next episode of Between Two Bots.